Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. The third golden age of rock, and the 1970s in general, are drawing to a close in the year 1979, and it's truly the dawning of a new era in music. The jolt of life that punk rock gave to rock music as a whole completely changed the landscape, with its ripples evident in subgenres such as post-punk, synth-pop, goth, and this newly mutated strand of pop called new wave. The spirit of punk even echoed in black music, where New York City produced a street-level cultural movement of mashup sampled music, outrageous dancing, dazzling visual art, and inventive vocalizing called hip-hop. But this podcast has already devoted 5 episodes to the progression of this world-changing genre, so we're sticking to where our beloved rock and roll is on this timeline. Having found themselves without a manager, The Clash regroup and put out London Calling, a double album that contains some of the richest, most stylistically diverse, most inspiring rock and roll music ever written and recorded. The Clash went from being The Clash, great British punk band, to being The MF'n Clash, all in capital letters. At a time of racial strife in England's inner cities, the Specials emerged as a defiantly multiracial band that merged the jaunty, celebratory feel of Jamaican ska with punk rock attitude and working class lyrics on their self-titled debut album. The UK solidifies itself as the world's center of innovative, cutting-edge post-punk rock, with a handful of some of the greatest and most influential albums of all time by the likes of Public Image Ltd, Gang of Four, Joy Division, and The Slits. Neil Young makes a roaring comeback with one of the best live albums of all time. Tom Petty breaks into the mainstream with Damn the Torpedoes. Michael Jackson steps away from the Jackson 5 to create a dance floor masterpiece. And Pink Floyd take conceptual art rock to its most extreme with The Wall. We're also going to run through 2 lightning rounds, one of all-time classic punk, post-punk, new wave singles that came out in this amazing year, and one of all-time classic albums that deserve serious shout-outs. Welcome to the year 1979 in the third golden age of rock, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
All right, Arturo, let us prepare now to do our usual boogie at the beginning of these episodes and go on over to the parallel universe, shall we?
Yes, we shall. We got some good ones this time.
Yeah, actually we do. And it just should be an interesting exploration. So over here in the parallel universe, rock is still predominant. It is still king. It is still on the the billboards. and the blue boards. And people still wear jean jackets with docking patches on them, and mullets are cool, and big meaty fat ass riffs are still the thing, and people dine and snack on rock and roll. They don't just consume it, they love it, and it never went out of style. And so that's a long way of saying that this is the segment of the show right here at the beginning where we cover albums by new and newish artists, and by or at least established indie and sometimes established indie artists that never quite made it big, but have had a following on the underground for a long time, which is one of the things I'll be doing here. And so we we think that you'll vibe on these albums. So, Art, who are you covering on this episode of the Parallel Universe?
Yeah, for a little over a decade, the British band Fat White Family have garnered critical acclaim and a small cultish following. They are known for their provocative and sensationalist lyrics. Unfortunately, lead singer and frontman Lias Saudi's social media postings are edgier and more controversial than Fat White Family's music, which for the most part is bland, watered down cliche indie pop. More interestingly, it is Saudi's side projects that are much better than his central band's work. In 2017, he put together a group called the Moon Landings and released an album called Interplanetary Class Classics, a wonderful fusion of early 1970s glam rock and early 1980s new wave pop. Another side project that Saudi has been heavily invested in lately, and by far the best thing he's done, is called Decius. Decius, right? And Decius just released their second album, Decius Volume 2, Splendor and Obedience. This is straight up hardcore techno and blissful, addictively catchy electronic pop. No pretensions, no bullshit. You can be forgiven for thinking it's a little too retro 1990s for its own good, but as late period Gen Xers and both members of the Curmudgeon Rock Report are, there's nothing that is too retro 90s for us.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a quality problem to have.
Yeah. Album highlights: the relentless groove of Queen of 14th Street, the insistent techno throb of Ghent, the dance floor banger of Ibrahim, and the industrial techno rush of Walking in the Heat. In a parallel universe where good electronic music is still on the radio, you would hear Decius. A very solid 4 out of 5 stars, and already one of my favorite albums of the year. Chris?
Yeah, definitely a throwback to the late 90s. You remember the Crystal Method?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is very much evocative of the Crystal Methods kind of stuff and kind of groove. And so it's straight banging acid house. And granted, over the course of a 12-song album, it gets a little samey.
It runs out of gas toward the end.
Yeah, it might as well be one long song. But that's okay. When you have a solid groove, that's okay. My favorite part of this element of this record, I think the most unique part of it, is Lias Saudi's vocals, where they seem to dissolve into the musical mix. They seem like they're about to dissolve. It's like a really neat psychedelic effect,
right?
Where they're wispy to the point of being their own instrument, like they're almost going to fade into the keyboards.
Right.
And, the way he does that does lend itself a little bit of mystery to the mix. But like you said, I mean, it runs out of gas, but so what? I think like albums like this, they're not known for their stylistic versatility, so to speak. It is what it is.
It's a dance record.
Yeah, it's a dancer. And it has a wheelhouse. It's acid house. It's got those those slamming beats and just aggressive keyboards, and it keeps going. It keeps the party started, and that's what it's there to do. So, in that sense, it's a successful record, and I'm curious to see what Decius does in the future. I'm not familiar with any of Saudi's other projects, but it sounds like I'm not missing much.
Fat White Family are not that good, but the Moon Landings are really good. Check that out. That's a good record.
Okay, I like the band name. I'm surprised they didn't call themselves the Fake Moon Landings. That would be a better name.
Yeah.
Anyway, now let's do a 180 from acid house techno
to country,
and let's go to the country, and we're going to the country from a kind of a surprising source. This is the new album by Bonnie Prince Billy, it's called The Purple Bird. Folks probably know Bonnie Prince Billy. That is the nom de plume of Louisville-bred singer-songwriter Will Oldham, who's been around for a long time. And his use of that Bonnie Prince Billy moniker dates back to 1999 when he released the modern folk music masterpiece, I See a Darkness, which is a loving tribute to the musical influences of Oldham's native Appalachia. In the years since, Oldham's Bonnie Prince Billy albums have continued to explore the contours of American vernacular music. His levels of inspiration have oscillated over the years, though, leading him to the rousing success of the 2 Superwolf albums he released along with fellow singer-songwriter Matt Sweeney, but also to the pits of boredom and dullness more than occasionally, where he got a little too spare and a little too folky and a little too clever for his own good. However, here we are in 2025, and Bonnie Prince Billy is finding a new way to remain relevant and refreshed. Oldham has now crafted an orthodox and quite good album of Nashville-style country music. The Purple Bird is a 12-song, 43-minute affair that delivers consistent pleasures and surprises. It's Oldham's strongest work in years, frankly. He bounces effortlessly between tender, sincere ballads and rousing and often very funny and cheeky, more up-tempo fare, and he sings each song with purpose and panache. Fiddles, banjos, and other traditional country instruments find their way into these lovely arrangements. Highlights include the silly but catchy In Trouble with the Missus country rocker, Tonight with the Dogs I'm Sleeping, the achingly beautiful yet sad breakup tune Boise, Idaho, which features subtle electric piano and pedal steel guitar tucked in next to lush strings, the goofy but smile-inducing accordion-driven waltz Guns Are for Cowards. There's Downstream, which is a lovely folky duet with country singer John Anderson, and then the mandolin-laden down-home boogie vibes of Our Home, which closes the album. The Purple Bird is one of the most consistently enjoyable albums of its kind I've heard in recent years. Multiple listens have actually proven pretty rewarding. I think I'll be spending a lot of quality time with Bonnie Prince Billy and the Purple Bird this year. Welcome back to Near Greatness, Will Oldham. Arturo, what's your thought on this album?
Yeah, this album's not bad. I honestly, I stopped following Bonnie Prince Billy in the late noughties or the late aughts.
Yeah.
His albums stopped being good.
Yeah, he went on a losing streak there. Circa
and
09.
got very repetitive and kind of recycled, really. But this album's good. It's endearing. That's how I call this record. There's some really nice, old-fashioned, down-home country stuff on it. By far, the best song for me is the last track, Our Home. Which is probably the closest thing to like a rousing, get up and cheer, country stomper on this record. It's one of my, it's a single too. Not surprisingly, it's the single off the record.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Which is already like one of my favorite singles of the year. But yeah, it's a good record. It's not bad. Pretty good.
Yeah, I give it up. I think that the strong point is the third and fourth tracks, which are Tonight with the Dogs I'm Sleeping and Boise, Idaho, back to back.
Yeah,
just a real juxtapisation of just kind of Tonight with the Dogs I'm Sleeping is a real wise guy. I'm in trouble with my woman. Kind of rascal song. Yeah. And then you have just again in Boise, Idaho is just beautiful. I mean, it's just him being forlorn about losing a relationship with a gal in Boise.
Yeah.
And just those two back to back. I mean, they're country tropes, but in Will Oldham's hands, he's such a competent, good songwriter and so confident in what he does. He really pulls them both off, and it's really neat to behold. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So, our third golden age of rock is nearing its end in the year 1979, but conversely, If you've noticed, we call this episode The Dawning of a New Era, coming to an end, but something new is beginning. And of course, the 1980s are coming around, and we're starting to see the sound, or hear the sound of what the 1980s will be like, with a lot of the music that came out this year specifically. But any discussion of the year 1979 has to begin with one of the single greatest albums in the 20th century, and you can make an argument this is one of the 10 greatest albums ever made, period, by anyone. And that is The Clash and their epic double album, London Calling. Like I said in our parameter setter, this is the album when The Clash went from being, hey, The Clash, great British punk band, to being the motherfucking Clash in big letters. Yep. And they became, as Joe Strummer has said many times, the only band that matters. Chris, tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, in some ways we're cheating a little bit here at the start, considering that the first entry from 1979 we're discussing was released on December 14th of that year.
Hey, still counts.
But what the hell? The Curmudgeons are always have been faithfully technical in how we view rock history.
Right.
And there can be no question that the 1979 album that had the greatest influence on the rock and roll that resulted from its wake was The Clash's London Calling. Now, without the Sex Pistols, there never would have been a Clash. Literally. The band's spiritual leader, Joe Strummer, decided to drop his popular band in favor of a punkier, angrier brand after attending Pistol shows in London in 1976. The Clash proved to be quick punk learners, serving up a powder keg of punk fury and guitar rage on their 1977 debut album, which is self-titled, widely considered an all-time classic. The attitude was palpable, but there were also hints of depth, as on the sincerely annoyed banger I'm So Bored with the USA, that demonstrated surprising worldliness and cleverness. It was more nuanced and funnier than Johnny Rotten shouting about the Berlin Wall anyway. Even so, I'm not sure anyone was truly prepared for what came next from The Clash. London Calling is a profound double album statement from a band that swung for the fences and rarely missed from this point on. There's probably never been a more tuneful album that explores the themes of existential dread or the lurking threat of Western imperialism ever released. There have been plenty of polemically charged hard rock albums over the years, but this album stands out ultimately because it's such a fun listen. Quote, "Phony Beatlemania has bitten the dust," Strummer growls unironically on the title track, which opens the album. "London, as he sees it, is pretty much doomed, what with ecological and nuclear threats abound and not much hope to be found among the young man's culture of the United Kingdom as the end of the 1970s approached. He can't subscribe to a hopeful facade, and alarm and discomfort mirrored by Paul Simonon's urgent bass line. Yet London Calling, the song, also features a graceful, lightly bopping rhythm. It's the kind of juxtaposition between pain, sentiment, and breeziness that The Clash revisits over and over and over again. Spanish Bombs is as a downright jaunty pop song that recalls the horror of the Spanish Civil War from 40 years prior. They obviously felt still reverberated in modern Europe. The chorus en Espanol translates to a snarkily devastating, "I love you infinitely, I remember you, oh my heart," in English. Similarly, Lost in the Supermarket takes on a love song feel as guitarist and co-songwriter Mick Jones croons about his alienation brought on by gentrification. Hidden track Train in Vain, which became the album's biggest hit, is a Mick Jones love song that also dabbles in depression. Notably, an embrace largely by Strummer, but also by Simonon of Jamaican music permeates London Calling. The infectious ska ditty Rudy Don't Fail makes the connection to the island explicit. It's a brilliant impression of the kind of thing that Bob Marley, Bunny Wailer, and Peter Tosh were doing with the Wailers in the 1960s. But the band also imports the reggae vibes to take more parochial stances, as on Simonon's Guns of Brixton, an electrifyingly woozy cry of working-class rebellion. Guns of Brixton is followed immediately by Wrong Boyo, another Jamaica-fied crime romp, this time a cover of an old song by the Rulers. The album's 19 songs are relentlessly catchy, making it easy to miss its lyrical profundity. But trust me, it's worth listening to this album with the lyrics laid out in front of you. This is probably my favorite bit, from Strummer's young man's crisis anthem, Death or Glory. Quote, In every gimmick, hungry yob digging gold from rock and roll grabs the mic and tells us he'll die before he's sold. But I believe in this, and it's been tested by research. He who fucks nuns will later join the church.
Great
Unquote.
line.
Yep. Again, I struggle to think of another album that sounds so hopeful while veering its overall messaging in such an opposite direction as this one. I suspect that's where that old line about the Clash being the only rock and roll band that really mattered comes from. At its best, rock and roll is supposed to piss off your parents, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's supposed to make you think and realize there's so much more to the world than the mundanity in front of your nose. An album like London Calling goes beyond even at that and figuratively expands your horizon. It doubles as both a visceral and an intellectual experience. The Clash spent the rest of its run as a band in a perpetual attempt to grow even more successfully ambitious than this. They released the triple album Sandinista a couple of years later, and while that album
1 year later, 1 year later,
1 year later, it was 80. Okay,
yeah.
And while that album has a lot of high points, it's not as consistently grand or as focused. Nor were the Clash ever in this zone again. Then again, almost nobody was. Long live London's Calling, the very, very best of the punk canon. Arturo, what's your thought?
London Calling, not London's Calling.
Oh,
London is calling.
Yeah, London Calling. Did I say London's Calling?
Yeah, London is calling me.
Yay! Okay, London Calling. Okay, there you go.
First of all, musically, it's amazing how this record, I mean, you pretty much hit on everything, really. Musically, it's amazing how this record is so rooted in the past, getting all, rockabilly, reggae, 50s rock and roll, soul, funk, blah, blah, blah. But it's so forward-looking as well, because you can see how the Clash's brand of this fusion influenced so many other bands later on.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in the ska punk field, especially in the punk revival of the 1990s with bands like Green Day, heavily influenced by the Clash. And I think Billy Joe Armstrong will be the first person to tell you. And Rancid, of course, my God.
Yeah.
So they were musically, they were, it was back thinking and forward thinking at the same time. Lyrically, a lot of, not just Mick Jones as well, but mostly Joe Strummer's lyrics about capitalism out of control and basically essentially, as you said, fascism and basically creeping and taking over the world. It's never been more relevant than now.
Yeah,
Joe Strummer might as well be like singing about the year 2025.
Yeah, I might as well be singing about Trump and Musk.
He might as well be, exactly, and which makes me glad that he's dead to not see what's happening.
Yeah, I was going to say, he did himself a favor by dying 23 years ago.
And this record really is all of that and then some. It's not out of it's really not an exaggeration or hyperbole to put this in the very, very higher upper reaches of the all-time great albums, because it really does belong there. It's a touching, it's a moving record too. It rocks, but it moves you as well, like lyrically, and the songwriting is so tight. I know some people are allergic to anthemic chorus type songs, but shit, man, no one did it better than the Clash. Like, not even you two.
And it's like one after another, like, Death or Glory, Clamp Down, they kept pumping them out. Even Rudy Don't Fail is a sing along. Really, really great stuff. Okay, so speaking of punkers that ska and scars that punked, let's move on and talk about the specials.
Right. So when people think of the UK in the late 1970s, it's the cathartic explosion of punk rock that people tend to think of the most, and understandably so. However, this period was also a time of some serious racial strife, as the rise of non-white immigrants, especially from the Caribbean diaspora, was accompanied by the rise of the far-right of far-right neo-Nazi hate groups, especially of the skinhead variety. Out of this cultural milieu came the Specials, a band whose sound and look can easily be taken for granted now, but younger music fans really need to understand how utterly revolutionary the Specials were at the time, especially for the punk and post-punk generation. First of all, they were a large seven-piece band, a septet, if you want to go with music parlance, that was racially integrated, with two members being from Jamaica. This in itself was certainly not common in England at the time, but that racial blend was integral to the message of the band's lyrics, which touched on topics such as the need for racial equality, class consciousness, poverty, and the need for understanding interpersonal and more understanding in interpersonal relationships, both romantic and platonic. In punk rock times, these lyrical sentiments were rather defiantly hippie-ish, if you think about it. And then there's the music, which was solidly based on Jamaican ska. For those who don't know, ska is essentially pre-reggae Jamaican pop music. Once the Rastafarian movement moved into the Jamaican mainstream in the late 1960s, more and more musicians started to smoke more and more pot. And then the brisk, skippy tempo of ska slowed down and reggae was born. However, the Specials eschewed the druggier, trippier style of reggae that was really popular and common at the time for the more upbeat, celebratory jaunt of ska. It makes sense. The white guys in the Specials came from a punk background, and the energy rush of ska much better matches that of punk than reggae does, even though you did have lots of punk bands already experimenting with reggae at the time, like The Clash. And then you had their appearance. No leathers, no studs, no chains for these guys. They wore two-toned black and white suits that resembled the British mod look of the early to mid 1960s. They cut their hair really short, and half the band wore fedora hats. They stood out musically, racially, and aesthetically from practically every other band in England. Snappy, poppy, irresistibly danceable ska music mixed with profound socio-political lyrical content and a serious punk rock attitude. Ska punk was born. The Specials came from Coventry in the West Midlands part of England, and they were formed in 1977 by keyboardist and principal songwriter Jerry Dammers, he with the missing front teeth, with Jamaican rhythm guitarist Linville Golding, lead guitarist Roddy Radiation. Yes, that was his stage name. real name Roddy Byers. Bassist Horace Panter, drummer John Bradbury, and vocalist Terry Hall. They started out as the Automatics. Then they became the Coventry Automatics. Then Special, aka the Automatics, because another band called the Automatics had signed to Island Records. Then it was Special, aka. Finally, they settled on the Specials because that's what their small but growing fan base was calling them anyway. Another Jamaican immigrant by the name of Neville Staple joined the band as second vocalist and the toaster. Toaster is the guy who's doing like the spoken word shouts with the other guy singing to complete the septet. And news about their retro yet refreshingly new sound started to circulate through music media as well as the UK music scene. Joe Strummer of The Clash was an early fan and took them on as The Clash's opening act for their 1978 UK tour, thus enhancing their profile. Rather than directly signing to a major label, band leader Jerry Dammers opted for more creative and artistic control and formed his own independent label, Two Tone Records, with the hope of getting major label distribution. Dammers had some altruistic purposes for creating his own label as well. In addition to his own band, he wanted to put out singles by unsigned bands without tying them down to a specific record label contract. Chrysalis Records became interested and essentially signed Two Tone Records as a subsidiary label. Just like that, snap, the Specials now had major label backing. In early 1979, they released their first single, Gangsters, which was a reworking of Prince Buster's 1964 Jamaican ska classic Al Capone. By spring, John Peel caught on to this new ska punk sound and played it on his very influential BBC One radio show, which resulted in the track hitting the UK top 10. The Specials had become overnight stars. In the summer, Elvis Costello signed on to produce their debut album, and with Cuban-born Rico Rodriguez and Dick Cuffle providing a vibrant horn section, that self-titled record came out in October 79 to universal critical acclaim, as well as hitting number 4 in the UK album chart. Forget about indie. This went straight to the mainstream. An instant classic, The Specials, the album, is the sound of exhilarating punk energy recalibrated to positive socio-political messaging and a refreshing reimagining of music of the past. You have the incredible cover songs that open both sides of the record. Danny Livingstone's A Message to You, Rudy, and Toots and the Maytals' Monkey Man. You have the dance floor poppers, Nightclub and Concrete Jungle. You have the whirlwind rush of Dawning of a New Era. You have the damning commentary of societal norms forcing teenagers to marry early after pregnancy, of stupid marriage and too much too young. The Specials single-handedly created a ska revival that eventually reached beyond the UK. In fact, the album hit a very surprising number 84 in the US Billboard chart and number 21 in Canada, sparking fresh waves of ska punk bands in those countries. They would go on to have a few more hits before breaking up in the mid-1980s, but nevertheless, the Specials' self-titled debut is a perfect album and a cultural moment that sounds as fresh now as it did then. Chris?
Yeah, here's the thing. Most of the punk bands in Britain at that time that dabbled in reggae and ska, they were punk bands and rock bands that infused ska. What the Specials were the opposite. They were a ska band that infused punk. Right. That they at their very nature and just from the way Jerry Dammers conceived them and put them together, not just a multi-ethnicity, but with the horn section and all that, they were a ska band, but they did it in a way where they had that kind of working class rock and roll ethos,
right?
And so it's punked up ska, not ska up punk, right? And so that's what makes it special, and especially when you get into some of the covers, and it makes it kind of because the covers of Concrete Jungle and Monkey Man are both reverent. But they're both like cranked up to like 12, not even
that's
11.
The punk. Yeah, that's the punk energy right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those songs end up regaining a renewed relevance, especially Concrete Jungle. From what was happening in Thatcher-led Britain at the time, there was a real sense that the government was screwing over poor people, and so this is the sound of revolution and. Dipping into the ska canon was pretty clever as a way of protesting Thatcher and protesting the British government. So and it became a pretty amazing record. It's a really refreshing listen. Even now, it holds up, right? And so. Just a rich record, rich band, and just very, very smart. Jerry Dammers was pretty much a genius for how he caught on to ska and how he was able to do these arrangements and punk it up. So more power to the Specials. And did we mention that the album was produced by Elvis Costello?
Yes, I did. I did say that.
Okay, there you go. when we just said it again, and so so Costello as an endorser. Obviously in 1979, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
To have Elvis Costello in your corner. So party on.
All right, Chris. Now, this year, it really is a stacked year, as you, the listener, are going to find out. Post-punk probably hit its absolute peak in 1979 with these 4 distinct yet utterly innovative and deeply influential and powerful records. Chris, let's start off.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 4 albums that really kind of make up the post-punk intense wave of 1979. And really what they do is you made a reference to this. They kind of signal the arrival of the 80s, that the 80s really started in 1979 with these records by what they introduced to the mix. So let us start with Public Image Limited's Metal Box. Now, folks out there, you might be familiar with Metal Box under its more widely known title, Second Edition. True to the avant-garde wise guy form band leader John Lydon was shooting for, Metal Box was originally released as a set of 3 12-inch vinyl singles. The album then morphed into Second Edition when Virgin Records released it as a more formal double LP early in 1980. No matter. What's here is revolutionary no matter what form you consume it in. By 1979, Lydon, the former Johnny Rotten, was as far removed from the angry but tight tunefulness of the Sex Pistols as possible. Rather, he was content to play in a more jagged and thumpier sandbox, something it turned out he only hinted at on PIL's 1978 debut first issue. And here he effectively turned PIL into a giant rhythm machine as he and his mate served up one bass-heavy lurker after another for Lydon to spit his freeform, surrealist, echoing lyrics over. The results were often hypnotic. Metal Box kicked off with the amazing 10.5-minute long jam Albatross, which weaves and snakes its way to Nirvana while a nearly indecipherable Lydon shouts and yelps way down in the mix. From there, the album wound and bopped its way through one experimental workout after another. These include the amusing Swan Lake, which structurally anyway resembles the ballet of the same name. It's like punk disco ballet, man. There also was the groovy as hell Socialist, which gets a robotic synth treatment in its mix that would have made Devo proud. Then there's album closer Radio 4, conceived and played entirely by band member and usually the guitarist Keith Levine. This 4-minute instrumental played like the theme to a macabre David Lynch film, and with its warm tones and electronic instrumentation, very nearly evokes the best of Kraftwerk. Levine, I would say, was ultimately the star of this show, over and above even Lydon. His abrasive metallic guitar noise painted these songs with subtly spooky brushstrokes and often ran counter to what otherwise would have been straight discotheque boogie. He really helped put the post in post-punk here. See especially the furious squawks and squeals of the unwieldy No Birds. Second Edition, or Metal Box, whatever you want to call it, marked an occasion in 1979 where What the Hell Is That became cool. Maybe PIL didn't invent post-punk on Metal Box or Second Edition or whatever, but they sure as hell perfected it, right, Arturo?
Yeah, I've always said John Lydon was the least interesting thing about Public Image Limited. What made these first two, this album and the previous album, First Edition, what made this band was the interplay between Keith Levine and his, like you said, his abrasive yet kind of sort of psychedelic textures on guitar with jaw wobbles, dub reggae based grooves. And their drummer, who was really, really good as well. And the band, the trio, those three is what made this band interesting. After this album, both Levine and Wobble left the band, and PIL went down the fucking shitter, like faster than like a 10-pound turd. Like for the rest of the 1980s and 90s. John Lydon has and still continues to make truly awful music. He's one of these guys who is a pretty compelling lyricist and an interesting vocalist, but he's only as he's only as fathomable and only as acceptable as his band can make it. So once those two guys left the band, Public Image died, and Lydon might as well have retired.
Yeah. And let me tell you, folks, having roomed with Arturo more than 2 decades ago, the man knows from 10-pound turds. Yeah. I put up with some weird shit literally in my bathroom back then. So he does know from 10-pound turds. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. Next album, Gang of Four Entertainment. Now, here's my bag, Arturo. Funk punk, baby. Yeah. Gang of Four did perhaps the best job of any post-punk or hard rock band for that matter in infusing clip dance grooves into its ragged riffage. This was punk rock to dance to, and the world is still dancing to the beat of Gang of Four today, as the British Quartet is among the most influential bands of all time. No Franz Ferdinand or the Minuteman, for instance?
Or the Chili Peppers.
Or hell, that's what I was going to say. Or the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Well, then inherently you know Gang of Four, even if you've never heard them bang and swing and groove through one of their patented dance rockers. Entertainment, with an exclamation point, belongs on the short list of greatest debut albums ever made, I think. The Rolling Stone voting constituency agrees, placing the album at number 273 on the most recent list of the 500 greatest albums ever made. The album is packed with booty-shaking grooves, even as the guitars cut through like buzzsaw and the edgy liberal politics of the lyrics hit their mark. Quote, fornication makes you happy, unquote, vocalist John King emotes on Itchy album highlight, Natural's Not In It. Yes, it does, as does the song's quirky bass line. The album actually starts out kind of weird before it settles down and really blasts off with its third song, the amazingly propulsive Not Great Men. From there, it's pure blast-off majesty. I particularly enjoy the back-to-back pile drivers Guns Before Butter, and I found that essence rare. Both rhythmic juggernauts with gloriously sing-songy choruses. The latter climbs especially into the big leagues of noise as its guitar playing grows more intense as the song builds. The closest thing to a hit on the album was At Home He's a Tourist, which is perhaps Gang of Four's most tightly wound, purposeful song, one of the strangest but coolest songs about domestic friction you'll ever hear. The song reached number 58 on the British singles chart. Gang of Four's entertainment holds up as a testament to the movement that was afoot in white rock and roll as the 70s faded and the 80s began. The hangover from disco was subsiding, the throb of new wave was rising, and the kids wanted to both rock and swing in equal measures. Gang of Four gave both to the masses collectively as well as any band ever had or has since. There you go. Right, Art?
Yeah, the influence of this band and specifically this album, it's pretty staggering when you think about it. It goes across multiple decades. You start with the Minutemen. If everyone's familiar with the Minutemen, that scratchy, hacky guitar sound and those funk rhythms, that's pure Gang of Four. Gang of Four had a direct influence on the Minutemen. The Minutemen just took the Gang of Four's music and made them 1-minute songs, basically. Mm-hmm. From the Minutemen to the Red Hot Chili Peppers. If you don't believe that, just ask Flea himself. He's gone on record saying multiple times that Gang of Four was a huge impact, a huge influence on the Chili Peppers sound. You could make an argument for Rage Against the Machine, even. The political polemic and the funk grooves. Maybe not the Led Zeppelin guitar riffs, of course, but it's Gang of Four meets Led Zeppelin with some rapping. Guess what? It's Rage Against the Machine.
Pretty much.
And also, like in the early to mid noughties, you had that both in the US and the UK, you had these indie rock movements. You mentioned Franz Ferdinand. I would also put in Block Party, LCD Sound System. Big influence on Gang of Four on them. A little bit of the Strokes, even a tiny bit, a little bit there.
Tiny bit.
Strokes. And a lot of those other bands, like really of the noughties, really, really indebted. Chick, 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 the 3 exclamation points.
Yeah, that's a good call.
That's clearly a Gang of Four influence, and they might as well be a Gang of Four cover band, you know. And it's a pretty overwhelming how influential they and continue to be. Even bands coming out now that sound like Gang of Four,
Yeah, I know. I mean, it just they came up with a formula, funk punk.
Yeah.
And, it continues to shine to this day, as does the next album that we're covering among this group of four, Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. Now, Joy Division and producer Martin Hannett may not have invented new wave on Unknown Pleasures, but they sure as hell invented something. This was a wholly cinematic post-punk sound with moody echoes, spacey rhythms, icy beats, and a strange mix of earthiness and the ethereal. It feels real and unreal all at once somehow, like a delirium spell caused by a bad cut to the arm or something. Calling it goth rock is probably too reductive, though. The album was too thrilling of an innovation for any sort of labels. This was the introduction to the world of both Bernard Sumner and Ian Curtis to the rock world, and this album was the only Joy Division album to be released during Curtis's lifetime. Love Will Tear Us Apart, and the cult surrounding it came a little later. But Sumner and Curtis were onto something here early on. They created a unique pulse and they laid down a dramatic sheen. These guys were both born performance artists, and Curtis's vocals and lyrics here are truly haunting, especially since they closely predate his suicide at age 23 in 1980. The standout song here is probably the Restless Melodic Insight. When Curtis yelps, "I'm not afraid anymore," you feel it straight in your bones. And when the laser shooting sounds that engulf the song's coda come on, it all sends a definite shiver down the listener's spine. Joy Division broke out big in July 1980 with the release of their masterwork Closer, but it's fair to call Unknown Pleasures one hell of a good starter volley. No one had ever laid on the sonic drama quite this thick, and really only the band itself and the early stylings of the band's moody peers, The Cure, came close to or exceeded capturing it afterward. Even more than Gang of Four's entertainment, Unknown Pleasures offers a vivid preview of the 1980s. This was the sound of evolution in 1979, truly. Arturo?
Yeah, this band's first release was an EP in 1978 called An Ideal for Living. And that is pretty much a straightforward punk rock record. Although you can hear traces of what they would do later in Peter Hook's bass lines. They weren't conventional punk rock bass lines. But the leap from that to Unknown Pleasures makes you wonder, were these guys doing any kind of drugs?
Yeah,
because
it's
the sound of two completely different bands. The sound on Unknown Pleasures has no precedent. There's no precedent for it. Like what influences it? Maybe a little bit of Bowie in his Berlin period. Yeah, that's stretching it. Maybe. The drum sound, that thin compressed drum sound, the amazing bass riffs, the inventive guitars. I mean, Bernard Sumner was no virtuoso, but he had a great sound. And I think gotta give credit to Martin Hannett, the producer, because he's the one who created the sound. He used Joy Division as his lab rat band.
Yep.
This is the sound that Martin Hannett had in his head, and he just used Joy Division as the band for it. Interviews later on, Peter Hook, the bass player, he never liked this album because he thought, it doesn't sound like we sound like live, mate. Well, no, you can't play this live. This is just a pure studio album. Joy Division, like Led Zeppelin, who were not really a heavy metal band, but they created the template and the house for heavy metal that Black Sabbath would take a year later. Joy Division did the same for goth. They basically created the template for goth. They weren't a goth band, but you can be forgiven in thinking they were. And they created the template and they built the foundation for it that bands like Bauhaus and The Cure run with later.
Yeah, like I said, it's that mix of earthiness and ethereal.
Yeah,
that and it really is kind of a haunting sound. It's a weird album, but it's really compelling.
I actually think it's better than I think it's better than Closer for that reason. I think it's more unified. It's more cohesive, actually.
Huh. Okay. Wow. That's the thing. I'm more familiar with Closer than Unknown Pleasures up to this point, and revisiting Unknown Pleasures here was pretty eye opening, and I'll have to take your word for it. Maybe I'll spend some more time with it. Maybe it'll win me over more, but Closer's pretty hard to beat. With Love Will Tear Us Apart and stuff like that.
That's not on Closer, by the way. That's a standalone single.
I got you. Okay. Good stuff. So, okay.
And then the next band here.
And so the next band and the final of these albums that we're covering in this segment, Cut by the Slits. Great name for a female band, the Slits. Reggae and other styles of Jamaican music we've established already had exploded as an influence in the UK by the end of the 1970s. The Clash, the Specials, and arguably the Police carry with them the greatest legacy of splicing the rhythms of reggae with the rage of rock and punk. But let's not sleep on some of the other UK bands whose influence isn't as immediately apparent or celebrated. Let's take this album, Cut by the Slits, for instance. Here, reggae is a key ingredient in feeding pure kitsch. This all-female band crafted one of the most fun, raunchiest, and bawdiest albums of the entire era. Unlike the Clash's London Calling, you can't miss what this band is going for, even if you're only half listening. The dub happy cover of the Motown classic I Heard It Through the Grapevine sells things particularly well. This is reggae-informed art pop with its tongue planted firmly in its cheek. These ladies were rude and crude and were not especially apologetic about it. This was a tuneful, danceable, hip-shaking giant middle finger to all the boys that might doubt these ladies as contenders. Quote, "Don't fuck things up, I'm getting sick." Vocalist Ari Up taunts on the minimalist dance hall nuggets so tough. Juxtapose that with a chorus sentiment of don't take things serious, and you see exactly where these ladies stand. One can't help wonder, listening to Cut, if the Slits had an influence on the Riot Girl scene that roared out of the Pacific Northwest a decade plus later, and my subsequent research shows that indeed Bikini Kill and Sleater-Kinney, to name two acts, were smitten with this band. So let's give it up for a seminal slice of feminist rock, which, by the way, sits at number 260 on that Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest albums. Art?
Yeah, this album is a terrific record. I think it's reggae with avant-garde funk and very subtle, sly, humorous feminist lyrics. It's not angry feminist. It's very feminist, all right, but it's done with a lot of humor. It's done with a cheeky humor because Ari Up, the lead singer and the main lyricist in the band, she was what, 17 or 18 years old when this came out?
Yeah, she was a kid.
So she still had that impish teenage humor to her. I think it adds to the record, actually, especially in a song like Typical Girls, which is basically a commentary on like male and female stereotypes and how they're just basically fed by the media, you know, and it's a really smart song for a teenaged person, and very clever and very astute in its analysis of mass media's effect on society. It's a great album. I love it. I didn't like it when I first heard it because I was like, what the fuck is this shit? But then the more you listen to it, it's like, oh, this makes sense. Yeah, they're basically upending reggae, and they're just deconstructing funk, and they're just making it all their own, and it's fantastic. Great record.
Good stuff.
All right. So now we've done that. Now we're going to close out the punk, post-punk, new wave section of this episode with a rundown, a lightning round of classic punk, post-punk, and new wave singles from this seminal year. So how are we going to start off? My Sharona, of course. The Knack, My Sharona. One of the great one-hit wonders in rock history. If you listen carefully to this song, the riff, the basic rhythm, the vocal melody, the staccato vocal delivery, it's basically a rewrite of Elvis Costello's Pump It Up. But when it's this catchy and rocks balls as it does, who cares? Fun fact, my oldest brother actually saw the Knack live in New York's Carnegie Hall right after this song hit #1 in the U.S. pop chart. The Knack, My Sharona, and Carnegie Hall are some words I never thought I'd hear together in a sentence. Next, The Police, Message in a Bottle. The next step in the Police's world domination. This worldwide top 10 hit saw them take their, at the time, patented reggae rock and speed it up for maximum rock power, led by one of guitarist Andy Summers' most memorable riffs. Stuart Copeland's complex drum rhythms, and Sting's gift for melody and vocal hooks. Next, Patti Smith, Dancing Barefoot. The main single off Smith's last album before her hiatus due to becoming pregnant and choosing to raise a child. This is a beautiful, unabashed love song, presumably about her lover/partner at the time, Fred Sonic Smith, former guitarist of the MC5. Before the Laws used heroin as a metaphor for obsessive love, and There She Goes, Smith was already making that connection on this track. For the record, U2, in my opinion, did an even better version of this song as the B-side to the 1989 single When Love Comes to Town. Next, the B-52's Rock Lobster. the song that put the B-52s on the map. This is outrageously weird and quirky, even for this era of outrageous and quirky music. Surf music on crack with Yoko Ono-esque yelping vocalizations and a fierce punky break in the middle. This is also the song that put Athens, Georgia on the alternative indie rock map. 1 year later, a band named REM would form. Next, James White and the Blacks with Contort Yourself. Quite possibly the funkiest song of 1989 done by a white guy. Its disco beat plus cowbell rhythm is a platform for one of the slinkiest, most elastic riffs ever put to tape. White, real name James Chance, was an important figure in New York City's late 1970s, early 1980s new wave experimental music scene, a scene that in a few short years would give birth to Sonic Youth. Next, the Buggles with Video Killed the Radio Star. This will forever be known as the very first video MTV played when it began broadcasting in 1981, but the song actually came out 2 years previously. A moderate one-hit wonder, new wave pop, was never as gloriously blissful and as sublime as this ode to a soon-to-be bygone era. Next, M with Pop Music. Shooby-dooby-doo-wop, pop music. M was basically a project of English musician Robin Scott, and he hit pay dirt on a ridiculous level with his Titanic smash hit. It went top 10 in at least 15 different countries and up to number 1 in about half of them, including the US. This really is the quintessential new wave pop single smash with its warbling guitar lines and shimmering synthesizers. Yes, you've all heard it, I'm sure. Next, Joy Division, Transmission. We already talked quite a bit about Joy Division and their seminal, groundbreaking album, Unknown Pleasures, but this standalone single from 1979 deserves just as much mention. What makes this track stick out in the band's short discography is how joyous it is in its unironic ode to the healing power of rock and roll on the radio. From Peter Hook's stately bass line to Bernard Sumner's Reach for the Stars guitar riff to Stephen Morris's tension and release drum rhythm, it's a 20th century masterpiece of rock perfection driven home by Ian Curtis's shamanistic vocals. Next, Public Image Ltd, Death Disco. We already talked about PIL's post-punk masterpiece, Metal Box, but this standalone single is perhaps better than any of the tracks on that album. I've always maintained John Lydon, like I said earlier, was the least interesting part of this band, and that's because of John Wobble's dub reggae-influenced bass grooves and Keith Levine's distinctly stinging, needly guitar lines. And that mutated disco beat on the drums just makes this a dance song from hell. Like I said, once Levine and Wobble left the band, Public Image Ltd died as a band, as far as I'm concerned. Next, The Cure, Killing an Arab. When it comes to The Cure, if you're only familiar with their alternative arena rock hits of the 1980s and early 90s, you will not recognize the band on this track. This is pre-goth, pre-makeup Cure, with the band sounding like another angular post-punk band trying to replicate Joy Division's thin, flat, compressed sound, and Robert Smith not singing about being all sad and lovelorn all the time. In fact, the lyrics are inspired by Albert Camus' existential novel, The Stranger. It's quite a catchy number, actually, and kind of gives one a sneak preview of the sugary pop the band would later wrap around with layers of dark, gloomy, goth dread in later years. Next, Bauhaus with Bela Lugosi's Dead. Speaking of goth, if Joy Division is the band most responsible for laying down the framework for the sound and style of goth, Bauhaus was the first legitimate out-and-out goth rock band. The full 9.5-minute version, the one that I prefer, is spooky, spectral, and even ambient, with its slightly reggae-influenced guitars, menacing bass line, and simple side-stick rim-click rhythm on the snare drum. One of the most darkly hypnotic singles of all time. Next, Susie and the Banshees with Placebo Effect. Their 1979 album Join Hands represents the band's last foray into confrontational post-punk before they would start the 1980s with a more accessible alternative rock sound. Placebo Effect is the main single from the album, and it's easy to hear why. The early Banshees could be heavy as fuck and had some punishing riffs. Next, Sham 69, If the Kids Are United. Now we get to some old style bullshit aggro punk with one of British punk's most proudly working class bands. This band loved their foot stomping, hand clapping anthems, and this is as rousing as it gets. This is basically Queen's We Will Rock You for the punk crowd. Next, The Cramps, Human Fly. One of the truly original bands of 1970s American punk. They were originally from Sacramento, California, and moved out to New York to make it as part of the CBGB scene. They stood out because of their, at the time, startlingly original vision of taking 1950s rockabilly, warping the shit out of it with explicit sexuality, and marrying it to punk energy and spirit. This is one of their defining songs. Next, Delta 5 with Mind Your Own Business. The Slits weren't the only all-female or mostly female post-punk band making noise in the UK in the late 1970s. A thumping disco beat is the background with one of the grooviest bass lines of this whole era and some truly slashing guitar work. Gang of Four weren't the only ones doing this stuff at the time, and this song remains their most enduring work. It was used in a TV commercial for Apple products in 2021. Next, Kleenex with You. More feminist post-punk, and this is one of the very best ones, courtesy of Switzerland. Shifty rhythms and a deceptively complex chord progression dominate this dynamite track. You can hear the DNA of bands like Bikini Kill and Slater-Kinney being formulated just in this song alone. Next, The Fall with Rausch Rumble. A band with one of post-punk and alternative rock's most daunting discographies. I've always maintained The Fall are best taken in small doses. This elliptical, trancy, yet maniacally intense single is probably one of their 4 or 5 best doses you can have from this group. An absolute bonkers track. Next, the pop group She Is Beyond Good and Evil. Speaking of bonkers, the pop group were notorious for their fiercely political stance that they would display in a psychotic amalgam of trippy dub reggae and noisy confrontational post-punk guitars and rhythms, with a lead singer screaming and whelping leftist propaganda in all sorts of demented voices. This song, taking aim at the newly elected Margaret Thatcher, is probably their finest moment. And last, a song that I nearly forgot about. Okay, no, it did not come out in the 80s. It came out in 1979. Gary Numan's synth pop classic, Cars.
Oh,
Chris, I'll let you take this one and go on from there.
Yeah, Cars is a pretty spectacular song, and it just has that melodic keyboard line to it, and just Newman had his best stuff had an iciness and kind of a sci-fi leaning to it, and this is like one of the finest, it's almost punk disco in the way that it's conceived. It's just a really well produced, well crafted, well arranged electro funk masterpiece of just pure noise and pure just iciness. Yeah, it's one of the iciest pop songs imaginable, and Gary Numan was a pretty spectacular artist, and a guy who could really stitch like those disparate pieces together. And I'm telling you, I remember as a 22-year-old kid standing in line at a Wendy's, I think it was, and that song came on, and I couldn't help but just start dancing. and everybody in the place was like, "What the fuck?" But here I am dancing to Gary Numan's Cars at a Wendy's. But that was the effect of it. It just it moved you to move.
Yeah,
for sure.
And any other favorites in that long ass list of mine?
Yeah, no, there's several favorites. I think Dancing Barefoot by Patti Smith is one of the greatest singles of all time.
Mm,
I would also put Rock Lobster and Human Fly on that short list. And
yeah,
the middle of that list is stunning because what you see is there's a lot of movement afoot
yeah.
between Transmission, Death Disco, Killing an Arab, Bela Lugosi's Dead, Placebo Street, and If the Kids Are United.
Placebo
Uh,
effect.
Placebo Effect. What did I say?
Yeah. Placebo Street.
Oh, Placebo Effect. And and so you see movement afoot there that rock and roll is becoming something else. You start to see goth come in.
Yeah.
You start to see new wave really transforming things. You see you get a kind of a wink hint at the 80s. And so
Yeah.
there's just a lot of really great stuff on that. Obviously, My Sharona. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't beat it. And you still hear it all the time. It'll never die on classic rock radio ever. Same thing with Message in a Bottle.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of great songs, and I think you really captured that the main theme of that list is movement from one thing into something else entirely.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of retroness in there too. So you get like 50s rockabilly, you've got reggae, you've got just a lot of and even like some sort of like 60s revivalism, like My Sharona,
Yeah.
has a lot of that going on too. So just a really great, rich, diverse list of songs that showed that movement was afoot, and the 70s were pretty much over and the 80s were pre-beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
On this episode, we broke down the year 1979 in our third Golden Age of Rock series. For the next episode, we're stretching back into the 1970s, furthermore into the 1970s, to discuss the career and legacy of a giant of R&B, soul, and funk music who we feel has been partially ignored by history and forgotten by younger generations of music fans. This, of course, is the great Curtis Mayfield. From being the leader of R&B vocal group The Impressions in the 1960s to being singer, songwriter, producer extraordinaire in the 1970s with a string of visionary solo albums and movie soundtracks full of beauty, power, and positive socio-political messages, Mayfield's body of work truly rivals those of peers such as James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, and Stevie Wonder. Yet, maddeningly so, he doesn't get the critical shine nor the retrospective acclaim from modern-day critics and fans that those other artists get, and that is simply not fair, nor is it right. Yours truly, Curmudgeons, are here to correct this miscarriage of justice. So join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Curtis Mayfield, the most underrated artist in music history. Damn right. Okay, so now we always begin the episodes of this series with the punk and the post-punk stuff. Okay, now we're gonna get into the more established acts and bands and artists, and it was a great year for them as well. There's some great stuff actually, and we're gonna start with something right out of Chris, your wheelhouse, your wheelbarrow, your home, your boy. You're the Neil Youngologist. Tell us all about it.
Okay, so in 1979, Neil releases the album Rust Never Sleeps, one of his greatest. And let's talk about this. Neil Young enjoyed one of the most astonishingly prolific periods of any songwriter ever had during the middle of the 1970s. His productivity created a quality problem. He had a boatload of songs and only so much space and time to release everything formally on wax. Over the past decade and a half, as Neil has opened up his archives, having just released a third volume of those archives last year, one of the project's recurring themes has been the introduction of quote-unquote lost albums into Neil's catalog. Most of these lost albums come from this teeming, explosive 70s era. Homegrown and Chrome Dreams are just two of the lost titles that have been released to date. And the argument can be made that had Neil dropped those albums as is into public consciousness back in the day, they'd be considered all-time greats. But alas, he had a ton of songs that wound up trickling out just slowly. Hell, some of these songs, like Too Far Gone and White Line, took nearly 15 years to gain formal release on the Neil Young studio album. So, how to compensate in the meantime? Naturally, by taking many of these songs out on the road with him, introducing them to concert attendees in both coffee houses and arenas. It's the latter venue, arenas, that gave rise to one of Neil Young's very best albums, Rust Never Sleeps. Released in June 1979, the album is a gathering of 8 majestic tunes that Young wrote between 1975 and 1977. If he couldn't find a way to bring these songs from wax to the crowd, then damn it, he was going to take them from the crowd to the wax. The album famously features one acoustic side and one electric side that features his legendary backing band Crazy Horse. Each side contains a version of one of Young's most iconic songs, alternately titled My, Hey, Hey, Out of the Blue and Hey, Hey, My, Into the Black. 7 of the album's recordings originate from a 1978 tour of the U.S. The audience tracks are largely removed, giving the album the feel of a spacious, soaring late-night live in the studio session. The best of these songs are the solo 12-string acoustic ballad Thrasher, a surrealist take on leaving Crosby, Stills, and Nash behind to choke on Neil's dust, and the epic tribalist war tale Powderfinger, on which the scion of a hillbilly family meets his maker while under attack from a rival family. The latter is Americana strewn through hell and absolutely bashed out by Crazy Horse. Young's guitar playing on each of these songs is among his finest in his entire catalog. The album is rounded out by lost studio tracks given new life here. It's a testament to the cleverly consistent production and mixing of David Briggs and Tim Mulligan that it was a surprise for me to learn back in the day that they don't come from the same source shows. First, there's Pocahontas, a magnificently strange ditty about the fleeting and violent nature of American history. The original solo acoustic recording receives overdubbed backing vocals, percussion, and flute, giving it a truly epic feel. Second, there's Sail Away, a wistful country song that features the singer Nicolette Larson on backing vocals and sublime harmonica playing from Young. What Rest Never Sleeps serves up is sort of miraculous, a hodgepodge song suite that gains a unity of purpose and worldview the more you listen to it. The album is equal parts soft and loud and covers so much of the American experience, from violent colonialism to the pangs of working for a living, and how the power of music helps transform it all into something special and potentially timeless. Rock and roll truly will never die. Neil Young hits the bullseye with that anthemic sentiment, definitely, and he does it over and over and over and over again. What a tremendous album, Arturo, right?
Yeah. You say this is a live album. So you're saying the tracks that are on this live album were not taken from the same show?
They're not taken from the same show. There's several different shows.
Oh, okay.
That they were taken from.
Here's the thing: you can go on YouTube, and because this was from a tour. He did a big tour, right? And you can find I think it's the Live Rust album. You can find a video movie of the entire Live Rust show. And it's from October 22nd in 1978 at the Cow Palace near San Francisco. And all these songs are on that live performance video. And I highly recommend people check it out if you want the full context of what Neil Young's live show was like during this time, which is where this live album comes from. Highly recommend that.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing about those shows, they were centered on this theme that, Neil was in his early 30s at the time. And it was this really it was built on this theme of wanting to hold on to childhood and to kind of resist growing up.
Right.
And so he had overgrown speaker props on stage, and his roadies were dressed up as Jawas from Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah.
Yeah. And so it had this it was very kiddish, very sweetly, innocently kind of youth-based. And I thought that was just kind of interesting that it's almost like he was saying he didn't like, to borrow a lyric from a song that he did years later, we don't want to grow old.
Yeah, so, pretty much.
So there was that. So that's definitely worth mentioning. And again, like the treatment that Pocahontas gets on this record, where it
Mm,
actually sounds like it's done live because it gets a new level of reverb and it gets all those overdubs, the percussion, the flute. It actually
right,
sounds like it's being done live, but
right.
it's a studio
Mm,
bastardization, and it's really, really, really fucking cool.
yeah. No, it's a classic album. It's one of Neil's very bests in his top 6 or 7 albums and deserves to be
Yeah.
on anyone's list of the greatest albums of all time because, God damn it, we say so.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, next, another one of the greatest albums of all time from another roots rocker, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and their breakthrough to the commercial, to basically their commercial breakthrough record, Damn the Torpedoes. Now, when Tom Petty and his band Mudcrutch left Gainesville, Florida for the greener, at least musically speaking, pastures of Los Angeles in 1974, they did so in the hope of being next in line or the next in line of classic sounding rootsy American bands in the vein of Creedence Clearwater Revival and Lynyrd Skynyrd. They got signed to Leon Russell's Shelter Records shortly after arriving, but they dissolved in 1975 after one single flopped and another one failed to materialize. Petty was fortunate, though, to remain signed to the label as a songwriter and solo artist. He brought back Mudcrutch guitarist Mike Campbell and keyboardist Benmont Tench, while augmenting the new band with fellow Florida expats Stan Lynch on drums and Ron Blair on bass. The new band was now christened Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Petty's vision for the sound of his music changed as well. This new band, while noticeably rooted in classic rock and roll and bluesiness, embraced a tougher, sharper, heavier edge and shorter songs that aligned them a little more with the burgeoning punk scene out in the East Coast. Their 1976 self-titled debut didn't sell in huge amounts, but the single Breakdown went into the US top 40, and American Girl got pretty good airplay on album-oriented radio. However, they went down big in the UK where they found themselves labeled as a new wave band. In 1978, their second album, You're Gonna Get It, while not quite as good overall as the debut, did commercially better than the debut, with I Need to Know and Listen to Her Heart getting consistent play on rock radio. More importantly, they were garnering a growing fan base through constant touring. In 1979, their make or break third album, Damn the Torpedoes, more than made them. Petty's songwriting had never been more focused, more melodic, and hook centric. Jimmy Iovine's production put a radio ready and commercial friendly shine on the band's rough and tough rock sound without losing any of their roughness or toughness. The album soared to #2 on the Billboard album chart and went 3 times platinum thanks to a string of hit singles. The bouncy power pop of Don't Do Me Like That reached #10 in the pop singles chart, while the raging rocker Refugee hit #15. Other rock radio hits that became staples of Petty's catalog include the rousing underdog anthem Even the Losers and the soaring romantic bombast of Here Comes My Girl. Hell, even the album tracks like Shadow of a Doubt, Century City, and the lovely Louisiana Rain could have been singles. With this album, Petty thrust himself along Bruce Springsteen as classic American rockers to keep the torch for heartland American rock burning into the 1980s. Chris?
Yeah, I like to refer to this album as Redneck Van Morrison because there really is kind of a blue-eyed soul thing that's going on. I mean, with some of these songs, especially stuff like Don't Do Me Like That and Here Comes My Girl,
Yeah.
especially, and even Louisiana Rain has that. Louisiana
Mm.
Rain is probably the best Springsteen song that Springsteen himself didn't write. And it
Yeah.
just a lot of good stuff. I mean, they Petty and the Heartbreakers are one of the foremost and most competent bar bands that ever
Right.
lived. And this album really just kind of captured the glory that they're capable of. I mean, it's just a really consistently great record. There's really no drop off. There's no bad songs, and it's just a really good 9 song, 36-minute cranker.
Yeah.
And Petty was just really gifted at that sort of like that bar, that alcohol soaked soul,
Yeah.
and he kept perfecting it. He got into the '80s with stuff like The Waiting
Mm.
and Don't Come Around Here No More, and all that. He kept perfecting what he was doing. And so, yeah, Damn the Torpedoes, damn fine record. Number 231 on that Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums list.
Wow.
But
In the
by the
top
way,
half.
yep, it's in the top half, and it probably belongs there. I said as bar band rock goes, this is one of the foremost volleys in history.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Now, next, we're getting as far away from bar band rock as possible.
Yep.
And we're getting into one of the albums of this year in any genre, it doesn't matter, where a young man by the name of Michael Jackson finally steps out of the shadow, steps away from the Jackson 5 to release a masterpiece of his own. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about Off the Wall. I love Off the Wall. It's absolutely the best disco album of all time, which is funny because it didn't hit record store shelves until August of 1979, a month after the notorious Disco Demolition Night riot broke out at Comiskey Park in Chicago during a radio stunt gone horribly wrong, but one that stated clearly where disco was in the heart and minds of the American public, which is to say they were basically sick of it. But then
Yeah.
came Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones with a wonderful 9-song volume that showed just how wrong even the best practitioners had gotten up to that point. Single-handedly, disco received a new life, and its death was instantly deferred. Off the Wall is incredible, most incredible, really, for one fact. Its foundation is chiefly built on several grooves that Michael Jackson himself wrote and demoed for Jones to juice up with strings, horns, percussion, and pure swagger. Seriously, don't stop till you get enough. Working day and night, get on the floor, all incredible. And Jackson crafted all those skitters and shifts and hip shakes and rumbles and coos and hops and yips himself. Dude was at his best. When he was at his best, he was as nasty as James Brown. Imagine the shock of record executives at Motown, Michael's former label, and Epic, his current label, when they discovered that the cute little kid that joyously belted out all those killer Motown factory singles backed by his brothers years earlier was, in fact, the most talented motherfucker in the building. Michael had apparently been dying inside for years for the chance to show the world what he could really do if and once unbound from record label orthodoxy. The 21-year-old Jackson finally gained a measure of creative control in 1979, and he rocked the shit out of it, which then, of course, makes him the best possible translator of other people's songs, too. Jones and Jackson perform a marvelous curation job in selecting and arranging some of the tracks on Off the Wall. Rod Temperton, who became more famous later on for writing Jackson's song Thriller, contributes 3 songs: the rollicking disco ballad Rock With You, the weird but nevertheless slamming, throbbing title track, and the Boogie On Down album closer Burn This Disco Out, which receives the best horn arrangement on the entire record. Michael also performs the really neat trick of making latter-day tunes from Stevie Wonder and Wings more than bearable, singing their songs with conviction and real pathos dripping from his voice. Jackson had a gift for making what should have been the corniest shit in the world utterly moving. His vocal performance is the only reason the morose ballad She's Out of My Life works. He sings that song like she not only dumped him, but shot his dog on the way out of the door, too. Off the Wall became a huge hit, eventually selling more than 9 million copies in the U.S. and producing 4 top 10 hits. It, of course, was the precursor to 1982's Thriller, in which Michael's freaky-deaky persona first started to gobble up the actual guy as he became the most famous person in the world. Naturally, Thriller casts a long shadow historically, as in my estimation, it wrongly displaces Off the Wall in terms of the degree to which it's celebrated. I personally think that Off the Wall is one of the 10 best albums made by anyone and of any type. The critical consensus disagrees, as Rolling Stone puts Thriller at number 12 on that 500 greatest albums list. but stupefyingly places Off the Wall at just 36. That's criminal to me. I'm telling you. So, what's your thought about Off the Wall, Arturo?
Off the Wall, I agree, is a five-star classic. It's one of the greatest albums of all time. I'm not going to debate that. But Off the Wall kind of goes, there's a list that I'm working on of five-star classic albums that are somehow yet a little bit overrated. And I put Off the Wall there for this reason. The reason being, all the greatness and the brilliance of Off the Wall is in the first half of the album. The first five songs and the very last song. Don't stop till you get enough. Rock with you, working day and night, get on the floor, off the wall, and burn this disco out. And all you got to do is look at the songwriting credits. It's all Michael, Rod Temperton, and maybe a little bit of Louis Johnson helping in and get on the floor. But it's Michael and Rod Temperton. And it's those two guys writing the best stuff. And that's where they're setting the world on fire with some of the best dance music ever made. And then you get to the second half, and I'm sorry, those songs don't hold up very well. I mean, Girlfriend is later period solo McCartney. Yuck. You know, I Can't Help It is actually a co-write of Stevie Wonder and Susie Green. The only thing Wonder really came up with is the bass line. It's really a Susie Green song, and it's not that great. Yeah, I agree. She's Out of My Life by Tom Baylor is pretty morose. And it's The Falling in Love, another one written by Carol Sager and David Foster. It's okay. It's nice. It's a nice song, but it's a bit lightweight, especially compared to like the first half and like the fucking fire that the first half of Off the Wall is and the very last track is. You know, it's a testament to how great those 6 tracks are, that it more than makes up for, you know, how fluffy that second half is, or most of the second half is. So yeah, that's my take on Off the Wall.
Yeah, I tend to disagree on that. I think that the Wonder and Wing songs, Michael performs those as well as he possibly can, and I think and he really makes them great.
There's only so much you can make chicken salad out of chicken shit, you know.
No, he makes chicken salad, and he makes them work. And you know, like hearing him sing McCartney, like late term McCartney. But Jackson really he finds the emotional heart of an otherwise really corny ass song, and it works. And I'm telling you, that album is just perfect. You know, it just has the skitters, it has the energy, it has the vocals, it has the soul, it has the funk, it has the disco, it just has everything. It's a nasty, nasty, nasty album, and it's just a towering testament to Michael Jackson's talent. Really is special, special record.
All right, now we get to the last album, or sorry, our last segment, not our last album, but our last full segment about the difficult double album by Pink Floyd, widely successful, commercially huge, but controversial in some spots, and it's a record that is controversial because, well, the story behind it kind of doesn't paint Roger Waters in a positive picture, does it, Chris?
No, not particularly. We're talking about The Wall, which is one of the biggest albums of all time. So let's start talking about The Wall. By 1979, Pink Floyd had become the most successful practitioners of progressive rock in the world. They had also become a master of visual stunts, unleashing a giant inflatable pig on the world as part of its efforts to promote 1977's great little album, Animals. But despite the success, the band's chief writer and artistic force, Roger Waters, was a merchant of misery. Starting in 1973, he focused in on madness and nihilism as his chief lyrical themes. Successively, The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and Animals had equated the mental meltdown of previous bandleader Syd Barrett with the meltdown of societal order and all good sense. The results over the course of those 3 albums grew stranger and stretchier, with some songs reaching into the double digits in minutes and defined by multiple movements. Animals itself was Waters' lampoon on the George Orwell novel Animal Farm. Rock stardom and government to Waters were both a drag, and his displeasure with both grew less subtle over the years. By 1977, Waters, aided by bandmate David Gilmour and hard rock super producer Bob Ezrin, chose to do away with any and all subtlety once and for all. Waters and Pink Floyd went big, they went bombastic, and they arguably went obnoxious. Even so, the result, the double album The Wall, was one of the grandest, showiest, most rockin' affairs of the entire decade. Waters here took everything he had concocted over the previous 5 years and molded it into a good old concept record about a tortured rock star who, motivated by his harsh upbringing, the breakup of his marriage, and especially drugs, becomes the equivalent of Hitler in his own mind and brings forth a rock and roll reign of fascist terror among the masses, or something like that. When you look at The Wall from a 30,000-foot view, it seems pretty ridiculous and overwrought, which is why it's just better to just enjoy this record on a song-to-song basis. If you digest it that way, The Wall is a magnificent affair, probably the best thing Pink Floyd ever did. Gilmour is especially on point here, serving up brilliant riffs and tuneful pop songcraft. Most of you probably know Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 with its "We don't want no education, we don't want no thought control" refrain. But Gilmour also musically serves up Young Lust, Waters' paean to groupies, the breathtakingly lovely slam of Waters' Mother, the brutally unsparing haunting rock or haunt rock of Hey You, which kicks off the double album's second half, and the romping, stomping slice of Evil Pursuit, Run Like Hell. Waters, despite his thematic heavy-handedness, also has some fun on The Wall. His contributions are especially fun to sing along with him, especially the brooding empty spaces, the tensely rendered One of My Turns, and even the goofily grotesque couplet of Waiting for the Worms in the Trial, which is when the Nazi shit really rears its head at the album's end. The Wall ultimately is an awkward young man's album. It appeals to the alienated, lighter-lighting, arena rock-loving nerd in all of us. That probably explains why I listened to the album constantly at age 17 and have probably listened to it all the way through a grand total of about 3 times since age 25, including once this week to get ready for this broadcast. It's better listened to with dumb ears and without too much thought into what could be seen as offensive subtext, which probably explains its undying popularity with the world's 17-year-olds. As long as there are blacklights and folks alike singing things like, "Are there any queers in the house tonight?" there will always be an audience for The Wall, especially among young white men. Pink Floyd and Roger Waters touring behind this record has been hugely successful over the years. It's meant to be experienced bigly in big venues. If all those guys weren't about to all turn 80 years old, they could probably still make millions taking The Wall on the road. So that's The Wall, Art. I know you're not nearly as sentimental or reverent about the album as I am, right?
Yeah, this is not really a Pink Floyd album. This is a Roger Waters album with Pink Floyd as his backing band and Richard Wright being a paid session musician. He was really kicked out of the band at this point. Listen, there are some really great tracks on this album. There really are. I love Run Like Hell. Comfortably Numb is one of the greatest songs in the entire Pink Floyd catalog. The big hit single, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, of course. Mother is actually quite a beautiful song. You know, and Hey You is great too. There's some really great tracks. But my complaint is that the concept falls apart 2/3 of the way through. It doesn't really hold together that well. The whole idea of Waters, because he puts himself into the character of Pink in this album. I mean, this is Roger Waters himself talking. This isn't him being in character. This is him. And it comes across. And Waters just being this rock star, whining and moping and complaining about being a rock star and having the audacity to compare it to like being a fascist dictator at a Nazi rally. I just find it offensive. You know, and the other offensive aspect of this record is how misogynistic it is. There's some parts in this which is really like, Jesus, Roger, do you even like women?
Ooh, I need a dirty girl.
Yeah, like oh yeah, and Mother. I mean, Mother has his Oedipal shit to it in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Yeah, as a whole, it's really difficult to listen to because of Waters' megalomania and his homophobia and misogyny, which come through. At least Frank Zappa had humor about it. Waters doesn't
Yeah.
have any humor about his homophobia and his misogyny. And that's what makes it less digestible. And that's why, as a whole, I don't like The Wall, but I do like individual songs from this album.
Well, that's kind of what I said. I mean, if you take the album as its parts
Mhm.
rather than its sum, it's a whole lot more enjoyable. If you take it song by song, and you take each song on its kind of in its own consumption, and just enjoy the music and what Gilmore and Waters are putting together song by song, then it's a lot better than thinking about, oh, he's trying to compare himself to Hitler as a jaded rock star, which is just like the most like self-indulgent, ridiculous thing ever.
Yeah,
You
no,
know what I mean?
it's absurd, and a guy who is a child of World War II Britain, should know better than that. But hey, he is a Vladimir Putin supporter now and a raging anti-Semite. So there you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, gee, what a shock.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that David Gilmour just cannot stand to be in the room with him now. Like they really really hate each other now.
Yeah, I could definitely see why. Okay, folks, we're nearing the end of this episode, and as we do at the end of these episodes, where we dedicate discussion to a year, we're ending with a lightning round of other great albums that we didn't quite merit their own rich, large segment, but really do merit some acknowledgement. And so we're going to start this. Arturo is going to talk about the record, and then I'm going to riff on what he's talking about. And we're going to go through a list of 9 of these albums, all of which are great. And so, Art, take it away. And what's first?
And they're all better than The Wall. Ha 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 ha.
Uh,
Okay, the first one, David Bowie's Lodger, the third of Bowie's Berlin trilogy of albums made with Brian Eno, and it's the most overlooked and unfairly so. Lodger eschews the second half ambient soundscapes that characterizes Low and Heroes, and it emphasizes some seriously quirky, angular, interestingly arranged art pop in fantastic tracks like Boys Keep Swinging, DJ, Yassassin, and the dizzying, almost avant-garde assault of African Night Flight. Bowie's penchant for beautiful mid-tempo ballads is still in abundance, with the outstanding Fantastic Voyage, with the brilliant lyric, learning to live with somebody else's depression. I wonder who he was talking about. It's a
uh,
perfect record, and in my opinion, one of Bowie's 5 best. Chris?
yeah, very underrated record. And one of the things I've always enjoyed about it is the fact that Fantastic Voyage and Boys Keep Swinging are basically the same song. I mean, they are the same song, and it's funny because I love the fact that one of them, Fantastic Voyage, is essentially swooning balladry, and the other one, Boys Keep Swinging, is just straight on gay disco.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable too how similar in some spots that this album is to the next one we're going to talk about, Talking Heads' Fear of Music. And I guess the one thing they share in common is co-production with Brian Eno,
Yeah,
who
definitely.
and it kind of shows you where he was latitude wise. I mean, seriously, put DJ or Red Money from this record next to Life During Wartime or Drugs
Yeah.
from Talking Heads, and you
It-
realize, hey, yeah, Eno was onto something
right.
in terms of a sonic template. So there you
Yeah,
go.
definitely. Talking Heads, Fear of Music, their third album and their second one with Brian Eno as producer, sees them move closer to funk and Afrobeat grooves while thrillingly expanding the vocabulary of rock song structure and lyricism. It's a near masterpiece, not quite a masterpiece. And Chris, do you know who else agrees with me?
Who's that?
Our favorite music critic, the great Robert Christgau. This is what he wrote in the Village Voice in 1979 in his review of Fear of Music. Quote, David Byrne's celebration of paranoia is a little obsessive, but like they say, that doesn't mean somebody isn't trying to get him. I just wish material as relatively expansive as Found a Job or The Big Country were available to open up the context a little. That way, a plausible prophecy like Life During Wartime might come off as cautionary realism instead of ending up in the nutball corner with self-referential fantasies like Paper and Memories Can't Wait. And although I'm impressed with the gritty weirdness of the music, it is narrow. A little sweetening might help. A minus.
Bullshit. Here's the thing. Fear of Music is one of my 10 favorite albums of all time. It's on my personal favorite top 10 list. I think this album's incredible. One, it's a very, very funny record, but also if you think about it, and a lot of people miss out on this, conceptually it's brilliant in the sense that the first song, Izimbra, is the tautest, tightest, most grooviest song on the record. But then as it goes along through its tracks, things get looser, they get lighter, they get more ethereal, they get more desperate, they get more shaky till finally you end up with the final song, Drugs, which is barely there. I mean, it's just basically this avant-garde, only a few notes and a few keyboard squonks, and so so basically everything is falling apart. And so even the title, "Fear of Music," is a high concept joke. And so just a lot of great songs on the record. Like "Heaven" is a great song. "Memories Can't Wait" is a great song. I mean, just genius level stuff from David Byrne, and just criminally underrated. I think it's a better album than More Songs About Building Than Food. I think it's better than Remain in Light. I think it's the best thing the Talking Heads ever did.
Well, Chris, I think you might be in a bit of a minority there.
Probably.
Anyway, yeah. Next, Blondie, Eat to the Beat. After the phenomenal success of their massive commercial breakthrough album, Parallel Lines, Blondie were faced with the struggle all bands have when having to follow up such a huge record. While Eat to the Beat isn't the stunning, perfect pop album that Parallel Lines is, it's still top-notch Blondie and probably their second best record. The disco rock hybrid of Heart of Glass is taken to a lush, decadent extreme with the Giorgio Moroder sound-alike Atomic, which went to #1 in the UK. Dreaming is an adrenaline rush combo of surf music and girl group pop that shows just how great a drummer Clem Burke was. Clem, not Clem, Clem Burke. Union City Blue is the kind of sun-kissed romantic pop that Blondie at this point in their career had perfected. It pales only in comparison to what came before it. Chris?
Yeah, strong record, and Dreaming is an all-time great pop song. It just rumbles restlessly and has wondrous girl group style vocals from Debbie Harry. In fact, I mean, basically what this band was basically hip, coked up white people taking on black girl group rhythms and harmonies of the early and mid 60s. I mean, that's essentially what they were. It was a hip, coked up white translation of girl group stuff. So it's like Debbie Harry doing her take on the Supremes, and it was glorious, really just glorious.
Yeah. Speaking of glorious, next, The Cars with Candy-O. Like with Blondie, The Cars had to follow up a perfect album, and in this case, doubly so because they had to follow up one of the greatest debut albums of all time.
No shit.
Fortunately, they knocked it out of the park with their second straight new wave classic. The title track is a strutting electro funk rock amalgam that still to this day sounds like the future of rock. The sleek power pop of Let's Go was a huge hit, hitting #14 in the US pop chart and has one of the most memorable synthesizer hooks in rock history. The haunting, blissful It's All I Can Do stands alongside Drive later on in the 80s as the band's best love song, while the driving, strident album closer Dangerous Type rides a killer synth line. It's easily their second best album. Chris?
Yep, easily their second best record. Not quite as good as the first one, but I will say
nothing
this.
is.
No, nothing is. But let's just say I do think that Let's Go might
Yeah.
be the best overall song they ever did.
Wow.
I mean, I love that keyboard part. I love the electric clap drums, and it all rubs up well against the dreamy harmony vocals. And one of the things about the Cars that amazes me is I have the hardest time distinguishing between the voices of Benjamin Orr and Rick Ocasek. They sound
Okay.
those guys sound exactly alike.
Ocasek is a little more exaggerated with his affectation.
Yeah,
That's Rick
yeah,
Ocasek.
yeah. He's a little bit more.
Orr's a little smoother.
He's a little bit more mumbly, where
Yeah.
Orr is a little smoother. But at the same time, it's really, really hard to tell at first. You have to really work to figure out, who is who, and so their interchangeability is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were an incredible band, really great songwriters, original visionary sound, and, great musicians.
Hmm.
Next, Elvis Costello with Armed Forces. Costello's third album sees he and the Attractions tone down their tightly coiled tension and full throttle bombast of this year's model in favor of richer textures, more moderate tempos, and classier, more piano driven pop rock. Lead single Oliver's Army, one of Costello's biggest ever hits, hitting number 2 in the UK chart, is his commentary on the socio-political turmoil in Northern Ireland. But it smoothed over one of the lushest song constructions of his career and a piano riff inspired by ABBA. Accidents Will Happen is another gorgeous keyboard pop concoction, and his rollicking cover of Nick Lowe's What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding is perhaps the best cover Costello ever did. It's an album whose central theme of war and military conflict as a metaphor for turbulent romantic relationships, and its juxtaposition with the sheer beauty and lushness of most of the songs makes this one of Costello's most fascinating albums. Chris?
Yeah, this is probably my favorite Costello album, just because it is toned down and poppier. And one of the things, people ask me, like, why aren't I all that enthused about Costello? And he never really reached me emotionally. And part of the reason is that the best thing he ever did to me by far was a recording of somebody else's song. And that's what I'm saying. The best thing that he did was the Nick Lowe song, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. And so when you look at it from that point of view, for me, it's like, okay, well, that's why I'm a little bit tepid in my response to Costello, because it took somebody else's song for me to really, really go like, yeah, that guy's killer. But Oliver's Army comes close, though. Oliver's Army that's a good song. That's a good song.
Next, XTC with Drums and Wires. With their third album, XTC start to calm down after the jittery rush, the nervy angular rhythms, and the idiosyncratic songwriting style of their first 2 albums, their previous work. Making Plans for Nigel is a stomping, booming percussive track that kicks the album off with a moving character study. The nasty lyrical throwdown of Helicopter can be interpreted by some as a bit misogynist, but all is forgiven when one is subjected to the ferocious drum and bass groove and some seriously aggressive, choppy guitars. These songs and others, like the irresistible pop of Reel by Reel and the twisting, winding When You're Near Me, I Have Difficulty, are marked by that heavier drum sound. This album is XTC's next step up toward their masterpiece, which would come out the following year. Chris?
Yeah, me personally, I've always thought that their masterpiece is really Skylarking from 1986. Yeah. But I will say this, that they were always a killer band, and their best song, to me, my favorite song is on this record, which is Making Plans for Nigel.
Yeah.
The song has a real swing and a real muscularity to it, and just really enjoyable, and it has a sing-song quality to it. And just really killer track. And the rest of the album is good too. It's quirky. Those first 2 or 3 XTC records are quirkier and a little less conventional than the stuff that Andy Partridge and company would do by the mid 80s, for sure.
Yeah. Next, Parliament with Golly Holla Stupid. By the end of the 1970s, Funkadelic was finally on the same commercial footing as Parliament, thanks to the success of the previous year's One Nation Under a Groove. However, the wild success and international cultural movement that was disco meant George Clinton's brand of down and dirty funk was looking a little bit passé. While Golly Hollow Stupid doesn't do that much to adjust to disco, it is a terrific album and one of the most underrated entries in the P-Funk catalog. The title track is a vintage mix of spacey booty shaking and humorous irreverence, while The Big Bang Theory and Theme from the Black Hole are badass funk jams with delicious synthesizer hooks courtesy of Bernie Worrell. The only nod to disco comes in the 10-minute jam Party People, and if you listen to the lyrics, it sounds more like a parody. This is possibly Parliament's last great outing. Chris?
Yeah, probably was their last great album. And for what it's worth, Spotify has this album in there as Glory Hollow Stupid, not
Really?
Golly Hollow Stupid.
Let me double check that right now.
Yep. Yeah, they have it as Glory Hollow Stupid. But really, the thing about Parliament was that to me, their stuff's not as substantial as the early Funkadelic stuff on, George Clinton's other project. But they were just routinely, their stuff was just fun. Their albums were just so fun. Yeah. And nothing here approaches the grandeur of some stuff like Flashlight. But Theme from the Black Hole is in the same ballpark. I really like that. It's just a gloriously dumb, cheesy song. And
by the way, Chris, Spotify is correct. I'm wrong. It is Glory Hollow Stupid. Sorry, folks. I made a mistake.
Glory Hollow Stupid. Yep. And that's the thing. Ultimately, this band was just so fun and so silly and so goofy, but they were so danceably enjoyable that you could just forgive them for being so corny, and so ridiculous, because their jams were just fun. It was just cranked up fun. I mean, it was like a bunch of overgrown 15-year-olds just having fun and jamming out in the basement.
All right, next. AC/DC, Highway to Hell. AC/DC were a great band from the beginning, and their early albums dripped with that raw, dirty, grimy, bar band sweat. However, if they really wanted to make the big time and get to arena level, they needed to make a big, clean, super produced record that didn't sacrifice any of their scruffy energy. Enter German producer Mutt Lange, who broke their songs down to their microscopic elements and built them up piece by piece to a refined, shiny razor edge. The nihilistic title track is one of the greatest heavy metal songs of all time, period. The gloriously sleazy Girls Got Rhythm may be rock and roll's greatest ever ode to fucking in the backseat of a car. Beating around the bush, rocks with optimal ferocity, and yes, from that title, you can guess what the song is about. If You Want Blood, You've Got It is vintage AC/DC style, fist-pumping, head-banging euphoria. It was their breakthrough album to the mainstream masses, but unfortunately, singer Bon Scott couldn't enjoy the rewards for too long because he, basically drank himself to death. Chris?
Yeah, which is too bad, because I actually preferred Bon Scott to Brian Johnstone.
So do I.
I mean, Scott wasn't as much of a screamer as Johnstone, and he wasn't quite as like blatantly, ridiculously sophomoric.
Yeah.
He didn't have any sort of giving the dog a bone or have a drink on me.
Yeah.
In him, but he also
he did have big balls in him though.
Yeah, he had big balls in him, and he also had an unadulterated and apologetically boozy swagger to him.
Yeah,
he sounded like he wanted to take on the world, and on Highway to Hell, he pretty much does. And Mutt Lange was a good producer for these guys. Like, he really knew how to make things big. Just big, meaty, bouncy, and just awesome. And just really great songs. I mean, I'm also a fan of Girls Got Rhythm. That's one of the best AC/DC songs ever. And again, it's a lot more straightforward and in some ways more respectful than giving the dog a bone.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. You know, I mean, like at least he was an adult about his horniness. You know,
Yeah. All right. And the final album in our lightning round of albums for 1979, Fleetwood Mac Tusk. When a band produces one of the biggest selling albums of all time, record labels usually want some of the same for the follow-up album. Thank you very much. Well, guitarist and one of the band's three songwriters, Lindsey Buckingham, wasn't really about to oblige. For someone of Buckingham's Californian hippie rock pedigree, the sound of punk and new wave must have seemed radical. His way of matching Fleetwood Mac's sound up with this fresh new movement wasn't so much to match its anger, aggression, and loudness. Rather, it was to adapt to its lo-fi, minimalist, break it all down philosophy. He achieved that by recording his songs all by himself in his own home studio, giving his tracks a rough-hewn demo sound. It ended up being a stroke of genius because Buckingham pours his burned, broken heart into these songs in a way he never had before or since. Songs like The Ledge, What Makes You Think You're the One, Not That Funny, and I Know I'm Not Wrong burn with a vulnerability and naked honesty that rivals his stuff on Rumors. As for the other writers in the band, Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie, their songs follow a bit more of the template established on the self-titled album and Rumors, but with the difference being a sense of spaciousness, an epic grandeur, and a widescreen melancholy that permeates throughout tracks like Over and Over, Sarah, Sisters of the Moon, Angel, and Brown Eyes. Contrary to what some critics said back then and still say now, no, the juxtaposition of the two styles and sounds does not make it an inconsistent or incoherent album. Instead, it creates a rich, eclectic, diverse tapestry of polar opposite sounds and textures that somehow complement each other. That is the secret to the brilliance of Tusk, yet another double album that debunks the bullshit notion that all double albums are indulgent, bloated affairs that should be edited to single albums. Tusk's disparate sounds, styles, and emotions combine to make it the album's strength. Chris, I know you've always wanted to devote an entire episode to this album, but hey, you get a segment.
yeah, we get a segment. This album is wonderful. And I've always kind of said that if you took out most of the Stevie Nicks stuff from this album, it would be damn near perfect.
I love the Stevie Nicks stuff. Oh,
I mean, I like Sarah, but the rest of it pales in comparison to the rest of the album. Lindsey Buckingham's solo stuff proves that cocaine was a hell of a drug. Because he, like you said, he stayed in his basement. And it was just him and Mick Fleetwood and John McVie on most of the songs. Stuff like Save Me a Place, which is just gorgeous. What Makes You Think You're the One, which is gorgeous. And Walk a Thin Line, which is just beautiful, too. And then you get stuff like The Ledge, which I think must have influenced Prince because Prince took some of that rhythm and it shows up on Dirty Mind a year later. So I'm not sure that that's a coincidence, but Christine McVie was also in a pretty special place on this record too, with stuff like Over and Over and Brown Eyes. They just wrote perfect pop songs, and because of Buckingham's genius as a producer and as a sonic maestro, they produced them perfectly. So this album is not quite perfect. It's not quite Rumors, but it's damn close. And I actually prefer it because it's a weirder record. And like, come on, I mean, the title track is one of the weirdest pop hits of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, it's basically psychedelic marching band music. Yeah, it's pretty crazy that song actually became a hit. So more power to Lindsey Buckingham, more power to Christine McVie, and mostly more power to Stevie Nicks. This album is pretty spectacular and one of my favorites, a personal favorite of mine as well. And that's the thing about this, this 79-80 period. just to give it an end, like for me, it's a special era because we covered three of my personal favorite albums on this episode: Off the Wall, Fear of Music, and Tusk, and then also London Calling. So that's
Right.
four of my favorite albums, and they all come out in late '79. And so,
Wow. Yeah.
so what a gloriously prolific period for rock and roll. And between that and all the post punk that came out, really special time when the '70s morphed into the '80s.
Yeah, really did. You
Yep.
know. All right, folks, we are done with the 1979. We're almost finished with his third Golden Age of Rock series. One more is coming up in several weeks, but we're going to end it now. And next week, in the next episode, we're going to devote an entire episode to a legend of R&B, soul, and funk music. You'll find out about it if you keep in touch with our Facebook postings.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, you can keep up with those Facebook postings by joining our fabulous curmudgeonly community on Facebook. And that's what we call our page up there. Art shares lots of music up there. We have some frequent flyer contributors. Thank you, everybody. And you, too, can become a contributor to our page, too, by joining the group. Go to facebook.com/group/curmudgeon rock. The page is invite only, but chances are we'll let you in. Also, if you think that we were full of shit or you disagreed with anything we had to say on this record, send us correspondence at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And finally, enjoy our Spotify playlist, which will be embedded in the episode description wherever you're catching this podcast, whether it's Apple or Stitcher or Amazon or wherever else. You can click on that link and you can enjoy lots of the music that we talked about here in this episode. And there'll be lots of merriment to be had.